Tonight, 3 remarkable cases that you helped solve.
Open the bank!
Coming up, the armed robber who led a double life as a TV pundit.
I had no guilt towards people that I was robbing because I didn't see them as humans.
And how this brutal rapist nearly killed this woman before your calls brought him to justice. But first...
There's things in life you can't replace, and it's the tactile relationship you have with your kids. Things like cuddles and kisses and, you know, even tickling her feet and her hands in the back of her neck. She used to totally be obsessed with me, sitting on my knee, tickling my feet, Dad. I just get woken up about 12 o'clock, unable to breathe, just suffocating, total suffocation, that's all I can remember. Opening my eyes, everywhere was black.
Wake up!
Tried to get back on the landing, but the heat was just too much. It wasn't a heat that you could breathe, it was a heat that would burn when you breathed. There's no oxygen. Totally disorientated.
Come on, everybody! Get out, there's a fire!
I was coughing up like black saliva and I couldn't breathe and it was just totally black smoke everywhere.
Help! Help!
We were in a situation where I thought, if none of us get out now, we're all going to burn to death. So I took it on myself. I said, I'm going to jump.
Help me! Somebody help me, please! Help me! The kids are still inside!
Eleanor's brother, Frankie, run up the stairs. Didn't have no concern for his own life, and he got Eleanor and Ambry out, and I can only thank him for that.
Christine!
Dad!
There's like an extension part on the front of the house where the porch is, and it's a lower level roof, and I climbed onto the roof.
Christina!
I've still got evidence of it now, a couple of burns, but I remember touching the window and it was so hot, the glass.
Cosby, Francesca!
I can't get her!
Dad, I said jump. And she had hold of Francesca's arm. I remember seeing her arm. I said, Christina, jump, and she wouldn't let go of her arm. I said, Christina, I'll get Francesca. In my head, I was thinking, I'll lower Christina down off the lower level roof and I'll turn around and get Francesca out the window. Because it was a slope like that, my feet just seemed to give way and I slid.
3-year-old Francesco was rushed to hospital with horrific burns.
It was immediately apparent on arrival at the address. There was a very strong smell of what I would call an ignitable liquid, what you would probably identify as something along the lines of petrol.
The fire was no accident. It was the attempted mass murder of an entire family. But neither of the parents, Kieran and Eleanor, or their children had any known enemies.
Who would want to hurt them? Who would want to target that family? Who would want to kill that particular family? And this was such a serious fire.
The staircase was surface charring, I would describe it as. Once you've negotiated your way past this, you're onto the landing. Off the landing, there were, I think, 3 bedrooms. Within the bedrooms that were involved, including Francesca's bedroom, plaster had actually fallen from the walls. Now, that will only happen where the temperatures reached in excess of 1,000 degrees C. So they're the sort of temperatures we're talking about, high level.
Fire destroys evidence, but the charred remains of the front door could still provide crucial clues.
There'd been significant damage to both the front of the door and the back of the door. It'd been almost haphazard in the pouring of the petrol.
The remains of a melted green petrol can found in the garden provided additional clues as to what had happened.
The petrol container didn't have a nozzle, and that became quite significant during the investigation because we recognised that as petrol was poured through the letterbox, it had splashed around the front door and probably splashed onto the person who'd been responsible for starting the fire.
Mystery surrounded a man found at the scene that night, suffering from severe burns. The man's name was Graham Heaps. He lived with his mother a few streets from the Bimpsons and knew the family thanks to a relationship he'd had with Eleanor's sister a few months earlier.
Help me! Somebody help me, please!
Kieran Sr., when he'd managed to escape from the house, the first person he saw was Graham Heaps standing in the front garden before anybody else was aware that the fire had started.
Help me! The kids are still inside! Escape!
What was he doing there, and how had he been burnt? Heaps's injuries were so severe that it was 2 weeks before police were able to ask him.
I was a little bit hungry, so I decided to go to the local chippy to get something to eat. Well, I'm going out. I won't be long.
Seen a few lads hanging around. One naturally wants to buy a weed, so I bought £5 worth of cannabis. Got back to the bottom of the road where I turned to walk into my street, heard screaming. Shot into the post, seen flames coming out of the door, screaming Francesca.
Francesca!
I ran into the house.
What made you run into a burning building?
Straight on, I was shouting Francesca, screaming her name.
Police were confronted with the extraordinary possibility that Heaps was a hero. His story seemed plausible, and checks into his background further distanced him from the crime.
There was no history of violence in his record, and clearly no history of arson. So when we were looking at such a serious act as this, it was unusual to look at an individual who'd never been involved in violence or never been arrested for violent acts.
What's more, forensic analysis of his clothing revealed no trace of petrol.
Was he a hero? Was he there as he'd explained? Was he a hero trying to save the family? And is that the reason why he'd run into the house?
It appeared Graham Heaps may have been telling the truth until police talked to his mother.
Mum, I'm going out. Won't be long.
She didn't know what time he'd left that night, but she did remember she'd been watching television.
She was able to tell us exactly what was happening in the programme at the time he left the house. Now, we were able to make inquiries with television companies, and we knew it was 5 to midnight.
Police also knew the fire had started about 5 minutes after that, at around 12 a.m, and Heaps was seen at the house around the same time.
Now, the account he gave us in interview would have taken him at least 15 or 20 minutes to walk to where he claimed to have bought something to eat, and then to have walked back to where the fire had taken place. Clearly, it couldn't have worked.
If Heaps really had gone to get a burger, as he claimed, the earliest he could have arrived back at the Bimson house was 12:30, nearly half an hour after Kieran saw him. Police had torn apart Heaps's alibi, but could do no more than that.
We didn't have enough concrete evidence to prove that he was the person responsible for starting that fire.
They had no option but to release him. Meanwhile, Kieran and Eleanor kept vigil as Francesca fought for her life.
If I can put this into some sort of context, my daughter had 90% burns, 3rd degree, which is through every layer of your skin. You can't even pick her up to cuddle her or tell her everything's all right, because there's a machine breathing for her. She's bandaged from head to toe, like a mummy. And the only thing you can see is her eyes. And her eyes are taped down because they don't want her to be distressed, and she's sedated. You couldn't imagine anybody more badly burnt than she was. She was totally destroyed as a person.
Three weeks after the fire, and 2 days before Christmas, Francesca lost her fight for life.
She's the closest thing I ever had. And carrying her down the aisle on my shoulder. It was an honour to carry her, but knowing that she was in there was the most heartbreaking thing ever. Words can't describe the pain that we've been through.
Police were now dealing with the murder of a 3-year-old girl.
We knew that there were people who would be able to guide us in our investigation, and that was when we made the approach to Crimewatch.
We're joined now by Detective Superintendent Steve Naylor. What on earth could be the motive for this sort of crime?
We have absolutely no idea what the motive is. The Bimson family are a really decent, hard-working family.
Just as Steve Naylor hoped, people did call in. The most important call came from an unexpected source.
Hi, I'm calling about the Francesca Bimson case, and I think I might be able to help.
Police had previously failed to find any evidence of petrol on Heaps's clothing, but the woman who called in was from a chemical analysis company that claimed they could find minute traces of petrol additives, even if the petrol itself had gone.
They were able to tell us that there was petrol on his clothing, but more importantly, where it was. They were able to tell us that it was on the front of his trousers and that it was also on the top of his training shoes. We knew that the petrol had been splashed through the front letterbox. We knew that the person who'd splashed the petrol through the letterbox must have splashed on their clothing.
Every brand of petrol contains unique additives. Scientists from the chemical company were able to analyse trace residue of those additives and identify the exact petrol used.
What was really significant for the investigation was the petrol container that had been found in the garden contained the same petrol that was found on Graham Heaps's clothes and the same petrol that was found on the mat at the front of the house. We were starting to bring the investigation together. Graham Heaps was connected to the petrol can and the petrol can to the fire.
Detectives then turned their attention to Heaps's injuries. Photographs taken just after the incident were sent to a burns expert in the hope that the wounds themselves would provide clues.
The burns to the arms and legs were very different from the face. So the burns at the arm were deep burns and consistent with flame burns. The injuries at his face appeared to be flash burns, and by that I mean they were sustained at a very brief point in time when an intense heat radiated at his face, rather like the flash of a photograph, and the appearance fixed a point in time and the position of his face at that moment. This strut of the nose and the rim of the nostrils was involved in the burn, but spared were areas above. This suggests that the cause of the flash was from below the face.
The presence of the flash burns was enough to convince police it was Heaps who had started the fire. He must have realised that the burns were a clear giveaway he was the arsonist, and so he took drastic action. The incredible conclusion was that Heaps had deliberately run into an inferno in a calculated act to cover his tracks. It was time to bring him in. Graham Heaps was charged with Francesca's murder, but the question remained over motive.
We knew that Graham Heaps had started the fire. We knew that he was responsible for killing Francesca. But one of the difficult questions then was why.
Linda, got a minute?
The answer, it seemed, lay in the relationship he'd had with Eleanor's sister.
I've got nothing to say to you, Graham, just leave it.
We knew that he'd been in a relationship with Linda, and it had ended some time before. He was clearly bitter about the breakup, but also he became bitter towards the family, towards Eleanor's family.
Look, Graham, it's over. Will you just get it into your thick head that it's over, OK? Just leave it.
We started to paint the picture of a man who did not like to be rejected. He wanted to harm Linda, but he wanted to harm her by killing her sister and her sister's family.
Police were now able to piece together what happened in the last hours before the fire.
Now, on the night of the 1st of December, he'd actually walked past Linda as she walked away from Eleanor's home. No conversation took place, but clearly that acted as a catalyst.
Well, I'm going out. Won't be long.
Everybody! Get out! There's a fire!
He stood in the garden. He was watching the fire unfold, and he was going to watch that family die.
Help me! Somebody help me, please! Help me! The kids are still inside!
Graham Heaps was found guilty of Francesca's murder by a unanimous verdict and sentenced to 28 years in prison.
This has been an incredibly difficult investigation. It's so hard to investigate the murder of a child, so difficult in the circumstances as this, because somebody had set fire to her as she slept in her bed, and they tried to kill the entire family.
A child who enjoyed life to this extreme, and, you know, she was somebody who had so much more to give, and she was robbed of that opportunity. She was just a gorgeous kid, and I miss her. I'll never, ever be the same.
Francesca will never be brought back. I just hope it gives some closure to the family, knowing that the right person has been convicted and sent to prison.
Still to come, how your calls help track down this vicious rapist. But now,
when I was shot, the bullet went in towards the left of the upper chest, just somehow missing my throat and spine, and ricocheted off of my collarbone on the right-hand side, and then it went into the back of my right shoulder blade. And that's where it still is at the moment. I think it was around 7 o'clock that I started out. It takes about 15 minutes to get down to the station.
At 7:15, CCTV recorded a white Ford Escort pulling up in front of the station. A man wearing a baseball cap got out. He was carrying a gun.
The only time when I kind of realised that something wasn't quite normal was as I was walking up to the station. I saw the female security guard.
Give us a box! Give us a box! Don't be brave! Don't be brave!
At that point, I saw a guy running away from her. He had a cash box in his hand, and obviously he had just robbed her. In the few seconds that I had to kind of make a decision on what to do, I could have just let him go, but I figured I'd just try and stop him. It wasn't until then I realised that he actually had a gun. The last kind of thing I remember is just him getting up. And then I think there's about probably 5 or 10 seconds that I don't remember. Kind of just felt my chest was very damp. I kind of put my hand to my chest, just saw a lot of blood. I did kind of ask for help, but yeah, then I kind of like collapsed.
Adam was in surgery for 8 hours and needed 16 pints of blood.
I don't think the paramedics expected me to kind of survive the ambulance trip to the hospital.
This wasn't a gun that had no ammunition in. This wasn't a fake firearm. This was a proper pistol, a pistol that was capable of firing and indeed did fire and almost kill a young man who intervened.
Heroic, that's how police in Essex have described a man who was shot by...
Detectives launched an immediate manhunt. It was rush hour, so dozens of witnesses had seen the men.
We knew that 2 people were involved.
Now, I'll cop the dough.
They escaped with that vehicle and, less than a mile away, abandoned it and set it on fire.
Let's go.
Witnesses described one of the men as having a distinctive limp.
Unusually, the getaway car had not been stolen. It had been bought legally a few days earlier from a private seller in Kent. Detectives immediately followed up the lead.
He was just an ordinary type of geezer, you know, just an ordinary geezer that buys a motor. And look, he's even got a receipt that I gave him, which he signed.
Do you want to take that away?
Of course I don't mind.
Can you put it in this bag?
Yeah, no problem.
But the name on the receipt was false. All forensic evidence was destroyed by the fire. However, just yards away, police found what would become the springboard for the whole investigation.
At the dump site of the getaway vehicle, in the middle of the road, there was a baseball cap. We were able to discover that there was actually some DNA evidence in it. The bad news was that the DNA profile did not match anybody's profile on the national database.
Police now had the unknown DNA profile of the man who'd shot Adam. The hunt was on to find him.
We needed names. So one of my tactics was to have a large media campaign, and that involved Crimewatch.
Tonight's first reconstruction features a hero. His name, Adam Mapleson, might not sound...
A retired Essex detective was watching, and the way this robbery had been carried out reminded him of an armed robber he'd come across back in the 1980s.
On the floor! Down! On the floor! Down!
A man by the name of Terry Smith.
25, 26 years ago, to my knowledge, he had motor vehicles in lockups ready to be used on armed robberies then. His style was never the fast, flashy car as a getaway vehicle, more the family saloon. I then saw the Crimewatch programme, the limp, and Terry Smith has a pronounced limp as a result of being involved in an accident during the course of another robbery many, many years ago.
In 1986, Terry Smith had been rammed off his motorbike by an earlier have-a-go hero. It landed him a 10-year stretch in prison and the telltale limp for life. Smith's name was just one of over 100 that came in after the Crimewatch appeal. Smith was now pushing 50. He'd been released from prison in 1995, and it seemed he'd been going straight ever since. But detectives wanted to make sure.
Mr. Smith, on the 25th of May, there was a serious incident at Rayleigh Station. Where were you that day?
I'd been at home. He volunteered to give a DNA sample, which did not match the DNA on the baseball cap. And really, that's about as far as we could take it at that stage.
The DNA evidence ruled Terry Smith out as the gunman, and with no further evidence to link him or any of the other names to the robbery, police had reached a dead end. But the gang was still active.
I've got 3 jobs so far, mate. Now I've got another one in Witten. Exactly the same MO.
On the floor!
It's got to be there. 3
months after shooting Adam, the robbers struck again. Then again in October, and again in November.
Sounds like we got another one. 10:05 this morning.
Each time with the same MO, buying a car legally, then burning it afterwards. Police were dealing with a major crime spree and a very dangerous gang. But with each new robbery, there was a chance for new evidence, and detectives made a breakthrough when they traced a man who'd sold another getaway car to the gang.
Oh, so you met the buyer at Upminster Station? And what was the time and date of that?
He was able to give us the date. He was able to give us a specific time. So we very quickly got onto CCTV evidence. And that CCTV evidence actually showed the seller meeting the purchaser. The purchaser got into the vehicle, but he did it in a peculiar way. He drew his sleeve down so that when he opened the car door, he didn't leave his fingerprints. That immediately rang alarm bells with us, because that meant that the purchaser of that vehicle was probably involved with the gang. We were in a position, frustrating as it was, to have an image of the individual We had the DNA of the person who shot Adam Mapleson, and we had a lot of witnesses who were able to describe the gang. But crucially, we didn't have the name.
Then, in January 2008, the robbers struck yet again, and this time they left police more to go on.
It very quickly came to light that another baseball cap had been found at the scene. Interesting that baseball caps are left lying around scenes, but nevertheless, a second baseball cap was left. It was forensically examined, and a DNA profile was taken from that baseball cap. We were obviously keen to see if it was the same DNA profile that had been found at Rayleigh. It wasn't. It was a man called Lenny Smith. The significance of that is that Lenny Smith is a brother of Terry Smith.
This was the second time that Terry Smith's name had come into the inquiry, and police decided to take a closer look at him. Armed robber Terry Smith had been a career criminal, in and out of jail all his life. He'd become one of the country's most wanted men when he was broken out of a prison van in 1984.
Come on, quickly, get out! Let's go. Crash your head in!
Police now had a complete picture of Terry Smith's criminal life, thanks in no small part to Smith himself, who'd put it all down in print.
He'd actually written a number of books, one of which was called The Art of Armed Robbery. That book actually proved to be highly relevant and a great source of intelligence for us. And really, we have to thank Mr. Smith for writing such a book, because he told us all about his modus operandi, told us about his family, his associates. In fact, he had photographs of his associates within the book. He claimed that he was no longer involved in any criminality and was just an expert. In fact, he called himself a robologist.
I'm joined now by Terry Smith, who was once an armed robber.
Incredibly, Terry Smith's robology led to numerous TV appearances.
I had no guilt towards people that I was robbing, because I didn't see them as humans. You know, I just see them as protectors of money. History tells you that the police are very efficient and effective at nicking some of the robbers, not all of them. And then, from my point of view, I just hope that some of them do get away, but
not everybody will share that point
no,
of view,
of course, but I mean, I'm a partisan member here, so I just think I wish him best of luck.
Could the man so comfortable in the Newsnight studio still be robbing cash vans when he was off air? DNA evidence had ruled him and his brother out from being the gunman at Rayleigh, but not from being the getaway driver. Police put them both under surveillance in the hope they would lead them to the man who shot Adam.
During the surveillance of Lenny Smith, he was seen in company with this other male who at the time we didn't know who he was.
Undercover officers followed him back to his home address and identified him as Brian Wall. Detectives thought he looked familiar.
The photo from the surveillance showed Brian Wall dressed in a flat cap and a dark coat, which was exactly the same as the person who bought the car outside Upminster Station.
60-year-old Brian Wall was now the prime suspect as the gunman at Rayleigh. Although he did have previous for armed robbery, his DNA wasn't on the database, but his fingerprints were.
Now go right back. Go right back to the purchase of the getaway vehicle for Rayleigh.
Look, he's even got a receipt that I gave him, which he signed.
From that receipt book, we were able to obtain some partial fingerprints. The fingerprints belonged to Brian Wall. Compelling evidence, I would suggest, that Brian Wall was a purchaser of the getaway vehicle used at Rayleigh. Was Brian Wall the man who had shot Adam Mapleson?
Meanwhile, analysts studying surveillance footage of Terry Smith had made a startling observation. Not only was the limp described by witnesses at Rayleigh apparent, but so too was a particular side effect.
I noticed that he got into his vehicle in quite an unusual way because of his leg and the fact that he couldn't bend his right leg. He got into the car head first and then sort of his body followed in. And I realised that that was the same as could be seen on the CCTV footage from Rayleigh, albeit the footage is very poor quality and time-lapse. You can just about make out that the offender there, the driver, he gets out of the car briefly, and as he climbs back in, he gets in head first. That really condensed everything. That was the moment where we kind of thought, you know, we've got the right guys.
We had the evidence. The public at large needed to be kept safe, so let's lock them up, and that's what we did.
Mrs. Smith, occupation, please. Crime writer.
Mr. Wall, I'm going to take a DNA swab from you.
Detectives were finally able to get hold of Wall's DNA, and as they expected, it matched the profile found on the baseball cap at Rayleigh Station. Police now had all the evidence they needed on the crime writer and his aging companion. Brian Wall was found guilty of shooting Adam and of 7 different robberies. He was given 12 years. The jury accepted Lenny Smith's explanation that he'd lost his baseball cap weeks before it was recovered by police. He was found not guilty. Terry Smith was found guilty of masterminding the robberies. He too was sentenced to a minimum of 12 years.
With that type of injury, I've just got to be very careful with kind of what I do in terms of walking around. I just think that there's no real point in kind of dwelling on the past. I mean, while obviously I do get reminded of it every day, I've just got to keep kind of upbeat about things. I've got the kind of rest of my life to live, so there's no point in being in a kind of depressed state for the rest of my life.
Well, I see both Brian Wall and Terry Smith as cynical individuals. Brian Wall was going to get away from that robbery by any means possible, and if that meant shooting somebody, then so be it. And as for Terry Smith, well, he's written several books, tried to make himself a minor celebrity, tried to make money as a reformed criminal when he was anything but reformed. He just couldn't stop committing armed robberies. He couldn't stop planning them. It was like a drug to him, there's no doubt about that. And eventually he was caught, and he's rightly behind bars for a long, long time.
And now, how police hunted down this violent rapist who left his victim in a coma, fighting for her life.
OK, can I ask everybody to come round as soon as possible, please? What I want to do is get you up to date on exactly what we're dealing with here today. We have a female in her 40s who has been found hidden, naked, under the side of a lorry out at Pennow Road in Exeter.
Do we have any identification for her?
Nothing at the moment. We're actually searching the area as we speak for items of property belonging to the victim and obviously for forensic evidence that we can find.
Exeter, July 2006. A frightening discovery was made. A woman, barely alive, had been found naked under a truck. Tucked away in a quiet cul-de-sac, her clothing strewn around like litter. Her name unknown. She'd been beaten and dragged across the road, raped, then left for dead.
When I took this investigation on, I treated it as a murder investigation. Our victim was very, very seriously ill in hospital. She was unconscious, she was naked. Visibly, you could see that she had serious injuries to her knees, she had bruising around her body. But what was the most serious was to her head. She had a fractured skull and she had numerous injuries to the brain. They were clearly life-threatening injuries.
Police had more questions than answers. Their only witness was fighting for her life and still had no name.
This was the most serious investigation going on in our force at that time. It was an investigation that we were very, very keen to resolve as fast as possible because A, we suspected our victim might die and we got a murder investigation, and B, there was the potential that this person could do it again. OK, could everybody just come and sit down? I want to update everybody on what we've got so far at the scene. Search team and the forensics are down there at the moment. Some pictures there, what we've recovered. If you look at this picture at the top here, a number of items have been found. This looks to me like a frenzied attack in and around that scene.
Her clothing had been thrown over a wide area, and with heavy rain that night, there was little chance of recovering any forensics. The investigation was paralysed.
We didn't know who that lady was, and that made it difficult from the point of view as we didn't know whether or not she had come from town, from the Exeter city centre area, or whether she'd come from the Whipton village area, which are in totally different directions. And that makes it really difficult because you don't know where exactly to start seizing CCTV from, for example, or conducting your house-to-house, or even searching for property which was missing from the incident.
Almost 24 hours after the victim was discovered, police received a call from a panicked woman. She'd become concerned when a friend she'd been out with on Saturday night had not been seen since.
It was the first time we went out that night. She was supposed to come round the next morning and get her young child, and she didn't turn up.
Her fears were confirmed. The victim was identified as Jane, a single mother with a young disabled child. Both women had young families. Their night out had been a rare treat.
We went out to about 3 pubs, just talking and, you know, having a laugh, and just like any night out, really. So normal.
They headed home in the early hours. These are some of the last images of the two friends together.
I'm expecting to have found her just woken up because she'd slept all day or something. I didn't think she'd be lying injured somewhere.
She was a terrible mess. Bruised, battered, almost unrecognisable. It was something I would never like to see again. It's just unreal.
Police had gathered hours of CCTV from hundreds of cameras around the city. They were now able to trace Jane's journey, working back from the attack site.
The team looked over, I think it was about 4,000 hours. That was months and months and months of work, painstaking work. And these people volunteered to do it. And that's the first thing, you've got to have volunteers. They spent basically 12, 14 hours a day looking for evidence.
Then, the first discovery from a shop camera seconds from the crime scene.
What that showed us was our victim walking past the store during the early hours of the Sunday morning. But it also showed us our potential offender closing in on our victim. And one of the things that really stood out to me about that footage was just how close that male person was to the victim, despite the streets being empty at that time in the morning. About 15 or 16 minutes later, the CCTV footage showed just the male person coming back, but this time he appeared to be carrying the victim's bag and rifling through it.
Then, a second discovery. Minutes earlier, a traffic camera had picked up the suspect ducking into a side street. He appears to look over his shoulder at Jane, who then continues down the main road. Was he stalking his victim? As officers studied the new images, it appeared the suspect was wearing a striped shirt.
The shirt itself was an unusual shirt in that we believed it was an older style Exeter City football shirt.
The shirt gave police a new lead. All they had to do was track their suspect across CCTV. But with hundreds of cameras in the city, it would take months. Forensics had produced a full DNA profile of the offender, but with no match on the database, they needed a name.
Your calls have seldom been more needed than in our first case tonight. We need them to find the rapist who wore a football top like this. It says Exeter Friendly on the front, not on the back. We ate Argyle, a message of hate for local rivals. But that is nothing compared with the attacker's hatred of women.
130 calls were received that night, but none yielded a name. Despite huge media attention, even appeals at local football matches, police were no further forward. With no witness to the attack that night, there was a growing concern that the only person able to help would never regain consciousness.
The whole family is at their bedside at some time or another, basically 16, 18 hours a day, just trying to talk to her to get her to come round. My other daughter made tapes of Jane's son talking to his mum, and just to try and break the coma.
Then, after a month in a deep coma, Jane woke up.
Once she regained consciousness, it was better because she was awake, but she was never the same.
She didn't really know what happened. She couldn't understand what happened because of the brain damage that had been inflicted on her. She had a problem with short-term memory. You could ask her what happened 20 years ago and she'd give you a graphic description, a very accurate graphic description. Asked her what you said to her 10 minutes ago and she couldn't remember what you said to her.
Desperate to make progress, police spent day and night viewing CCTV and widening their search. Then, finally in October, a new discovery.
Come and have a look at this.
I was here one evening about 6 o'clock in late October, and one of the CCTV team came in and said, "Boss, I think I might have got something." I looked at what he had and I thought, this is terrific.
He looks good.
Right, and you've got him on that map coming down from Ricko Place
So we should be able to track him back down to the key from here.
Wearing the same striped shirt, they had spotted their man, this time with 4 girls.
Do we think he's with them?
My initial thought was this individual had been harassing those girls, or potentially harassing those girls, or that they might possibly know who that individual was.
Identifying the girls in the picture could lead them to the attacker. The team reappealed on Crimewatch.
So these 4 girls, I mean, they couldn't possibly know that they were in the company of one of Britain's most brutal rapists.
Well, we believe he bears striking resemblance in the description and the description of the clothing that he's wearing.
Detectives had a breakthrough. A member of the public called in, recognising one of the 4 women. When they traced her, she identified the man in the CCTV as her brother. They finally had a name: Jakub Tomczak. A Polish national, he'd been working in Exeter as a hotel porter. He also lived with the girls just minutes from the attack site.
What we gathered from the girls was that Jakub was, to all intents and purposes, a normal person. There was no issues as far as they were concerned. He didn't have a girlfriend or a partner of any description, but they were comfortable enough that they used to go out on occasions with him, and they certainly went out that night down to Exeter City Centre, where they visited various premises and enjoyed an evening out. About 2:30 in the morning, they'd walked back through Exeter High Street, and Jakub had left them near to Marks and Spencer's, indicating that he was going to go to a nearby hotel to collect some cigarettes, and the girls then walked on home.
For months, police had been hunting for a man in a striped football shirt, but new images near the hotel showed Jakub in a checked shirt. Low-quality images from cameras at night had misled them. Police were keen to speak to Tomczak and obtain a DNA profile. If it matched the one found on the victim, they would have their man. But shortly after the attack, Tomczak returned to Poland, so they turned to his sister for help.
She asked him to go into a local police station in Poland and provide a voluntary sample of DNA, and he agreed to do so.
A few days before Christmas, detectives in Exeter received the results. They had a match, of 1 in a billion. Jakub Tomczak was their man. The extradition process took months, but finally in April 2007, Tomczak was arrested at Heathrow Airport and immediately taken into custody.
I'm arresting you for the rape and attempted murder of a female in Exeter in July 2006. These officers are now going to take you through into the custody area.
In January 2008, Jakub Tomczak was given 2 life sentences. He was convicted of rape and causing grievous bodily harm with intent. He was deported back to Poland to serve his sentence. With no previous convictions, nobody thought he was capable of such a horrific attack.
You don't just start by committing one of the most serious and horrendous crimes this force has ever investigated. Normally there's a build-up along somebody's criminal history that they will have committed other crimes along the way. To all intents and purposes, this person had started right at the top.
Despite 2 years of rehabilitation, Jane could no longer look after her disabled child and needed full-time carers herself.
When we went to court, she said in her victim impact statement, "I wish he'd killed me and finished me off," which is really tragic to hear, bearing in mind she had the rest of her life ahead of her. You know, 48-year-old female with a young son, no concerns in the world, and basically her life was ruined by the actions of that man.
I could see her going downhill. It was a struggle just to keep her going for the last 18 months, 2 years.
She was funny, friendly, happy, energetic, loving mother, caring friend.
I still, every now and again, sit down and think about it. I find a tear come to my eye. Many people seem to think I'm coping with it well. They should sometimes sit with me at night when I'm on. Then they know the difference, they know the truth.
Live sport is what